The Honourable Member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to share my time with the member for North Okanagan-Shuswap. And my congratulations to you, Mr. Speaker, on your election. So although I rose briefly during routine proceedings last Friday, this is my first speech in the 43rd Parliament, and I would like to take this occasion to give some additional words of thanks. So, as a temporary custodian of this seat in this Parliament, I am deeply honoured to have the enormous responsibility of representing some 140,000 residents as part of a centuries-old tradition of protecting citizens by checking the otherwise unlimited power of the Crown. Parliaments exist in order to ensure that the Crown and its agents, the government, cannot impose itself on citizens without their consent, and that consent is granted through votes in this incredible institution. Once again, I thank the voters of Calgary Rocky Ridge for electing me to be their servant in this House. I also wish to thank the some 270-odd volunteers who assisted my election campaign. I thank them for their support, for their commitment to their community, and for their love of their country. I could not have done it without them. I'd like to thank the other candidates who contested the election in Calgary Rocky Ridge for giving the voters choice, without which there is no democracy. And finally, I wish to thank my family, my 3 daughters. It seems I began the last Parliament with 3 young girls who are now 3 young women. And my loving wife, Kimberly, thank you for your love, for your understanding, for your patience, and for your unwavering support, and for always keeping it real in the Kelly house. And to my parents, Marnie and Dwayne Kelly, thank you for your constant love and encouragement. So, Mr. Speaker, today we're debating last Thursday's speech from the throne. And my response to the speech from the throne is colored by the recent experience of having knocked on a little under 30,000 doors with my re-election team. And what I heard on the doorsteps is what informs my remarks and my impressions from the speech from the throne. So to be blunt, Mr. Speaker, this government has virtually no support in my riding. Okay? That's simply a fact, and it's supported by the election results. I knocked on doors in the communities of Calgary Rocky Ridge in every provincial and federal election over the last 30 years as an activist, and in 2015 and 2019 as a candidate, and I've never experienced anything quite like it. It was never easier. People have never been more forthright in coming forward and identifying themselves as Conservative supporters. Yet at the same time, I have never had more difficult conversations on doorsteps than I did in this election, and that's with people that had suggested that they intended to support me and to support my party and my leader. For most candidates in most elections, conversations with their own supporters are the easy ones, but not in 2019 in Calgary Rocky Ridge. Some of the conversations I had with supporters were downright heartbreaking. I spoke with people who haven't worked in years. I heard from people who told me that they were on the verge of losing their homes. I talked with people whose spouses were working in Texas and coming home for a couple of weekends a month, or were working in the Middle East or other parts of the world and only coming home a few times over the course of a year. I talked with a man who has lived in his neighborhood for 20 years, and he said that since 2015, 7 previously stable families on his block had come apart in divorce. Economic stress and anxiety from unemployment and failing businesses has taken their toll on families, tearing apart the very fabric of our communities. I spoke with people who openly and candidly expressed their despair, their anger, and their incredulity over what they see as a failure of their country to respect their province. A province which for decades has welcomed Canadians from across Canada, and indeed people from around the world, to be a part of Alberta's economic opportunities. A province that has transferred much of that wealth back to other provinces and continues to do so despite a recession that has been going on for 5 years. My constituents are demanding action. They cannot wait. They made it abundantly clear to me that regardless of which party was to form a government after the election, they would expect me to speak clearly and without ambiguity about just how devastating these past 4 years have been. They expect me to be candid about just how upset they are with their federal government. They told me that they wanted the No More Pipelines bill reversed. They told me they were stunned that a tanker ban on Alberta exports was brought in while tankers continue to bring in oil to eastern refiners from Saudi Arabia. They told me they couldn't understand why a government was running such large deficits at a time of economic expansion. They told me that they were appalled by the constant parade of ministers to the ethics commissioner and by a prime minister prepared to bully his own cabinet and break the law just to get his own way. And by the way, this prime minister's personal conduct never matches his moral preening. They told me at door after door that the prime minister is a constant source of embarrassment on the world stage, and that they do not believe that he is up to the diplomatic challenges of our times, because they believe that he is fundamentally an unserious person. And so with the campaign behind us, with the country's divisions laid bare in a minority parliament, last week the Prime Minister had an opportunity to acknowledge the failings of the last parliament, which cost him seats and votes in every region of the country. He had an opportunity to chart a new course to address the concerns of Canadians who rejected his government's track record. Instead, he delivered a speech full of the same flowery language and grand aspirations we heard throughout the last parliament, with inadequate words, only a few inadequate words for my constituents, partial sentence, kind of as an afterthought, where he claimed that they would, quote, or they said they will, quote, also work just as hard to get Canadian resources to new markets and offer unwavering support to the hard-working men and women in Canada's natural resources sectors, many of whom have faced tough times recently. Really? Mr. Speaker, unwavering support have faced tough times recently? That's it? Since 2015, hundreds of thousands of energy workers have lost their jobs. Over 100,000 of them are out of work in Alberta right now. $100 billion in energy investment has left Canada since this government took office. Encana, which was once Canada's largest company, and Trans-Pacific Pipeline are changing their names to remove Canada from the names of these businesses and relocate to the United States, because that's where the work is. And all this Prime Minister had to say in his speech from the throne was unwavering support in tough times recently? Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister has been unwavering in his stated desire to phase out the natural resources sector, and he's succeeding. One incredibly insulting sentence that contains a flagrant untruth is all he had to say about it in his entire speech. If this Prime Minister meant what he said about getting Canadian resources to market, it would require him to undo much of the work of the last Parliament. It would require him to repeal Bill C-69 or implement every single one of the Senate amendments that were rejected last spring. It would require him to repeal C-48. It would require him to champion Canada as a reliable source of ethically extracted resources and disown his own prior anti-Canadian energy rhetoric. It would require him to actually take concrete steps to ensure Trans Mountain can be completed, and it would require him to apologize for chasing its private sector proponent out of Canada and for having to send $4.5 billion in Texas so they could compete with us by building pipelines elsewhere. Yet these Liberals think they deserve some kind of credit for buying a pipeline that should never have been for sale in the first place. I can assure them that not one single person I've met in my riding, where pipelines are a huge issue, thought that buying it was anything other than a last-ditch solution to a problem 100% of their own making. So to sum up, Mr. Speaker, this speech contains nothing for my constituents. I received a strong mandate from the people of Calgary Rocky Ridge, and I expect them to hold me to a high standard. My constituents expect nothing less.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And, it's interesting. I'd love the opportunity maybe to sit aside with the member and contrast the response I got from the constituents in which I represent versus the constituents in which he represents. But what I do know is that Canadians want and desire to see opposition parties and the government working together, more so than they have in the previous 4 years. And that means, at the end of the day, looking for ways in which we can see policies that will further advance Canadians as a whole. For example, today we talked about the TMX. The TMX is actually moving forward. Would he not agree that that is a positive thing? Something in which I must remind the member opposite that the Conservatives were not able to do. So even though he's been very critical, and often the Conservatives like to take personal attacks at the Prime Minister, let me assure Canadians and those that are following the debate that this is a government that will continue to focus on strengthening Canada's middle class and has a strong willingness to work with all members of this chamber to make a positive difference for all Canadians in all regions.
The honourable member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Well, the member for Winnipeg North already, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, and I thank him. And I would ask him, he's talking about his constituents, and I do congratulate him on his re-election. I have no doubt that he has support in his riding. I note that in his city and mine, he lost colleagues. We gained colleagues. I think that at the doors in both cities, I'd be surprised if there was widespread support for his government. But to his point about cooperation in this Parliament, if the government on the other side proposes measures that will be helpful to my constituents and to Canadians more broadly, I am more than happy to offer my cooperation and my support. We are here to support Canadians and to represent our ridings, and I will cooperate fully with any measures that this government can propose that will help my constituents. I saw none in this speech from the throne, and I invite him to come and knock on doors in Calgary Rocky Ridge with that speech from the throne and see what kind of response he would get.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Laurentides-Labelle. Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I would like to say hello to my constituents in Laurentides-Labelle for having placed their trust in me. For a while now, we've heard talk of prosperity, but let's not forget that there is one important issue. People are vulnerable. A little earlier, we talked about community organizations. We talked about the fact that there are not enough skilled workers generally. In my riding of Laurentides-Labelle, 1 person out of 6 is low income, and this is an alarming fact. Those people are not working, and they are having a very difficult time to making ends meet, even finding a simple apartment or place to live. So I have a simple question for you. What are we all going to do to help all these people who today are suffering, who cannot contribute to the prosperity of this country, which we all want? I'm putting my question to you. What do you believe the answer is? Thank you.
Ridge. I thank the member for her question and welcome her to this chamber. I have some very, I think, simple and concrete steps that would benefit the well-being of all Canadians, and that is for this government to become a champion of our resource sector. It supplies jobs to Canadians all across the country. There have been thousands of workers in Quebec that used to come and work in Alberta, and they had good, high-paying jobs that contributed to the prosperity of the province of Quebec, not only from the income that they earned in Alberta, but also, of course, through the enormous transfers that have taken place over the years. So the economic opportunities that have been lost under this government represent billions of dollars that could be used for all manner of social programs. With the investment that has left Canada and gone to the United States, we are literally exporting hospitals, exporting schools, exporting social services to the United States. The lost tax revenue, the lost income revenue has been appalling under this government.